All right. It is now 1:02. So I think we should get things underway. So hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Christy DeCosmo, and together with my colleague, Catherine Jackman, and the entire Seidel family, we are thrilled that you have joined us for our second event in our not-for-profit series, Strategic Planning, the do's, the don'ts, and the vital things to watch. At Seidel, we exist to simplify complexity, which generally comes in the form of working with our clients, whether they be high net worth families, institutions, or not-for-profit organizations, to design and deliver customized solutions that ensure wealth is protected and properly positioned. What I found quite amazing is that our keynote speaker today, Hugh MacPhie, also strives to bring simplicity to the complex. Those who have worked with Hugh feel that he has a special talent for making complex ideas simple while not losing their importance along the way. His background as a packaged goods marketer, and political speech writer has helped him to refine his ability to facilitate conversations that achieve clarity and leave people feeling inspired. Hugh is an author and advisor to some of Canada's most successful corporate, government, and not-for-profit leaders, having worked with TMX Group, the Government of Ontario, and the Mental Health Commission of Canada, to name just a few. He founded and oversees MacPhie, a consultancy that works with boards and senior executives on key issues such as strategic planning. I found it really interesting to learn what fascinates Hugh, and that is, what do people cheer for and why? Exploring this question led Hugh to MacPhie's magnetism philosophy, which is based on the premise that organizations and brands either naturally attract or repel people who matter to them. Hugh's book, Don't Forget Your Cape, What Preschoolers Teach Us About Leadership and Life, makes leadership lessons easy to understand and is a manifesto for building high-performing teams. It has been praised by the Globe and Mail, the Toronto Star, and the London Free Press. Hugh has guest lectured at Western University's Richard Ivey School of Business, Carleton University's Master's Program in Political Management, and the Bachelor of Business Administration program at Wilfrid Laurier University. Hugh, welcome.
Thank you so much, Christy, and welcome everybody. It's great to see this august gathering of people from right across the country, and I'm just so excited to be joining you today to talk about some of my perspectives, some of my insights on strategic planning, how it relates to not-for-profits, and frankly how it relates to other organizations as well. And I just want to begin by thanking Christy and thanking the Seidel team for bringing us all together like this. I think it's really cool that they're doing this, and just a big shout out to Christy and to everyone from Seidel for bringing us together. I'm really excited about our discussion today, and as I say, I think what's fascinating for me is, while we'll focus on some of the insights that we have from our work on not-for-profit strat planning, I think a lot of these lessons transcend all organizations. And what's somewhat fascinating today is there's an increasing fluidity between the not-for-profit sector or the private sector and those things that live between them. And there's a real cross-pollination of learnings and thought processes that I'm seeing from our work with private sector organizations thinking about how do we figure about this ESG thing a little bit better, and not-for-profits thinking more about, well, how do we ensure that we're sustainable in an environment where share of wallet is increasingly an area that's being fought over, and government funding, quite frankly, can't be relied upon necessarily in the same way that it was in the past. So within that general context, I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. And I want to begin, thinking about the not-for-profit organizations with whom we've worked, and there's been quite a few. I want to borrow an analogy from John Gray from the 1990s, and the loose analogy that not-for-profit leaders are from Venus and board members are from Mars. And the reason I love this analogy in this context is everyone is well-meaning when they come together to serve a not-for-profit, but the perspectives and the points of view and the worldviews of board members and executive directors or presidents or CEOs are often quite different, and everyone wants to push the organization to do better, but it can sometimes create these odd tensions that aren't intentional, but they can sometimes show up. And I have a lot of sympathy for leaders in the not-for-profit space. And I remember once standing in front of a full leadership team, full board, and probably about 130 people for this one hospital for whom we were doing a strategic plan. And I remember trying to address the board in particular and saying, you know what, running a private sector organization, that's pretty straightforward. You try running a hospital, and you've got the mayor on the phone, you've got doctors who are ticked off about something, you got union negotiation issues, you've got funding challenges, and there's this multi-dimensionality of leading a not-for-profit that I just find really fascinating. And I think it's so important for those who want to support and be genuinely helpful in guiding those not-for-profits to really take that moment to step back and just appreciate those differences of perspective and points of view. Because I can tell you, I would personally never want to run a university, never want to run a hospital, because of the complexities and the difficulties therein are just so overwhelming. I want to share, before we get into our conversation, as Catherine was saying, just a few general lessons from our perspective that I hope will color our conversation today. So the first thing, when thinking about strategic planning overall, but particularly in the not-for-profit world, is to start by defining what we would call our product objectives. So what do we want the deliverable, the actual plan itself, to do and to achieve? And we've had contexts and circumstances where people say, we just need to meet a regulatory requirement. So this is more of a tick box exercise than anything else. And I said, that's fine. That is a perfectly acceptable product objective. We've had other people say, we really want to build a case for support for our fundraising efforts. And so a big objective of the strategic plan isn't just to provide direction to the leadership and to the board with respect to key priorities and key results over the next X number of years, but to really use something that's going to get people inspired and excited about the future direction of the organization. So being really deliberate about what those product objectives are is something that we would always encourage. Related to that are the process objectives. And I've often said that in a strategic planning process, the process and the way in which we go about getting to the end product is as important as the product itself. And that means ensuring that we are deliberate and explicit around the level of buy-in we're getting, say, from staff or key stakeholders. How are we ensuring that, if need be, the marketing element of outreach and listening and market research is also understood and appreciated? And a lot of the work that we do, we often say that if we're working on behalf of an organization to consult with stakeholders on their strategic plan, we want to leave those interactions with those stakeholders feeling well and thinking better about the organization before they began that conversation, while also ensuring that we're gaining insight and perspective in different points of view. But being really deliberate on what is to be sought to be achieved through that process in particular. And I'm sure we'll talk a lot about COVID over the course of our discussion today. I think in a COVID environment, that's particularly important, because the blessing and the curse of COVID is we actually have a lot more flexibility right now in reaching out to other stakeholders and individuals whom would be otherwise difficult to do. So being deliberate about that and understanding how to best manage the process. Related to that is, I'm a huge believer that strategic planning processes are a science first and an art second. And a good strategic planning process begins with the end in mind. And I always like to think about, when the final product at the final board meeting is being presented, and a few board members start to do the slow clap with just a little tear in their eye about how delighted they are about the future direction of the organization. That's the end point. And so the question then becomes, how do you reverse engineer all the different steps from that moment? And by being over designed in the process and in the different components of how we're going to get to that end game, it's not just because we want to be overly disciplined, because inevitably something's going to go sideways. And when that happens, we want to be able to say, no problem, that's perfectly acceptable, and we can adjust accordingly, given the rigor and given the discipline and given the precision with which the process has been designed, which then allows people to be creative and to be thoughtful and to unleash net new ideas that otherwise might not emerge. Again, I'll speak a little bit of the COVID context in this. That level of discipline is even more important, given just what people are feeling and experiencing these days. And people have asked, can we do strategic planning in this context? And the answer is absolutely, because the show must go on. But it's very important to take into account and consideration a higher level of operational discipline in strategic planning, so that people feel really comfortable in the process itself. One of the questions we're often asked is, what are some of the key components around the timing of a strategic plan, and what needs to be thought about within what context? And our view is that the purpose, the vision, and the mission really should be etched in granite, and to be a 10-year vision or a 25-year vision, but extreme flexibility is needed in the lower down one gets into, say, priorities or key results. So our view and our advice in these things, and I think this is advice that transcends any organization, is to have that long-term North Star, be it a purpose statement or a mission or vision, that is relatively stagnant over time, but to really encourage flexibility when it comes to the more granular components of the strategic plan. And that's something that we are increasingly fans of, given our current reality in the VUCA world in which we exist, where there's so much volatility, there's so much ambiguity, and predicting what's going to come next becomes increasingly difficult. Another key lesson that we've learned the hard way over time is to be very deliberate in our terminology. And this gets back to the Venus and Mars slide as well. And I'll always remember one time we were doing a strategic plan, and we were brought in, given direction, like, yep, we want to develop a strategic plan for organization X. And I remember the president of the organization saying, yeah, we've got this one guy, I want to bring in for the session. He's fantastic, guy from the UK, he's new to Ontario, and he's going to add a ton of value. And I could feel that there was just some ambiguity in the room. And I turned to this guy who was apparently the superstar, and I said, well, from your perspective, sir, what are the core components of the strategic plan? Because we seem to be struggling around this. And without skipping a beat, he said, what really matters in his view is to answer the questions who, what, when, and how. To which I did a virtual face plan. I said, that's a fantastic definition of an operational plan and has absolutely nothing to do with what we're talking about here today. So the reason I share that vignette is clarity on what is exactly the objective. And it gets back to the product objectives as well, but to be really explicit in one's terminology, because we want a calendar and deliverables list and who does what when and what the budget is. That's very different from what I would call a strategic plan. The strategic plan is a much higher level visionary articulation of where an organization is going, how it gets there, and who does what, and what the budget is and by when. That's more on the operational side. Another thing that we're huge fans of is to permit flexibility in the tools that one uses and uses to capture and articulate what an organization aspires to be. And we often begin with sort of a general kit, that includes a purpose statement. We're huge fans of what we call guiding principles, which is very different from values. That really gets into the soul of what a culture should be for an organization, and then defining objectives and key results. But what I encourage people to do is to really think about, what do you need, and what are the tools that can articulate and capture what's most important for an organization as it moves forward. And one of my favorite examples of this, we did some work with Seneca College here in the province of Ontario, probably about 6 years ago. And we did a really comprehensive process for their strategic plan. And one of the things we uncovered was what we called the Seneca Attitude, which was a manifesto of what their aspirational culture could be. And it was a function of all the focus groups and all the one-on-one interviews and all the discussions we had with their faculty, their staff, and their students. We said, you know what, there's a voice here. There is a tone, there is a vibe that is not UBC's vibe, that is not the University of Alberta's vibe, that is not the University of Toronto's vibe. It was unique to them, and we sought to capture that as an important tool because it was central to reinforcing aspirationally who and what they could become. And then finally, and related to that is the strategic plan itself, as defined, should have a voice and reinforce the brand of any organization. And the tone and the flavor in which it's written should not just default to MBA speak. It should be very deliberately designed to reinforce the product objectives and the process objectives, and to do so in a way that gives that life and energy to the brand and the positioning that the organization seeks. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and welcome some comments and reflections and discussion about this. And I am always the first to admit that I do not have a monopoly on all the insights around this stuff. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from everyone on our Zoom call today through Seidel to get your perspectives and inputs on this as well.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much, Hugh. And thank you everybody for joining us. I know this format's perhaps a little bit different. I know sometimes you come to an event and it's a webinar and you can kind of sit in the background. So we're going to do a couple of things here. I'm going to get us started with a question, and I'll ask you to think about your questions. Please feel welcome to send those directly to me in the chat. You can either right click on my image with those three dots and you just click there, and you can press chat and send me a question. And also for people who want to engage more in conversation, which we certainly welcome, we'd love it if you would use the raise your hand feature. So that's at the bottom of your screen under reactions. You just press raise your hand. Only thing we'd ask, just wait till I call on you. But we do want you to feel as comfortable as if we were all in the same room. So I'm going to ask you one question and let him answer it. And then we're going to stop recording. And then we'll see if we can get all of you talking. Okay, so here goes. And then I'll start taking it from the audience. Hugh, that was really insightful in terms of the different things people are thinking about and the way to frame things. You've mentioned that the pandemic has been a time of paralysis, frankly, for many organizations.
Yeah, that's true.
Can you talk to us, especially in that context, how can leaders, from a practical standpoint, engage in strategic planning, given that, many of them are in emergency mode? Are there things that they want to start thinking about, or things on the other end that maybe they should avoid right now? If you could just give us some of your thoughts on that, that'd be great.
No, 100%. It's a great question, Catherine. And this has been just a bizarre time for everybody. And I think everyone's figuring it out as they go along. So a couple of key points. So point number one is the show must go on. And I think for a lot of organizations, after that moment of deer in the headlights, like paralysis, as you were describing, the question became like, how do we thrive, and how do we do the best we can under these circumstances? I don't want to underestimate, though, what we've seen in strategic planning and in broader planning efforts, just with respect to the mood out there. And I think this is an important lesson for leaders generally, is that what we're seeing is what I call deep tired. And deep tired speaks to, in some cases, it's a level of lack of motivation and lack of ability to, okay, I got to go beyond just going through the motions on things. And I'll share a quick vignette. And so we were doing some work with a big university, And I got to give credit to the provost of this university, which is basically the head of the academic side. And she said in front of her colleagues, and I'll paraphrase, she said, you know what? I just find it really hard to get up in the morning and get motivated these days. And, you know, talk about the slow clap. I started it and said, thank you for sharing that, because you just gave voice to this bizarre mood that we see in a lot of our client engagements right now that people are feeling. And it's this sense of deep tired. So the question becomes how to get past that. And ideally, in your day-to-day work, you're finding those moments of energy and refreshingness. And the irony of strat plans is they actually contribute to that, because they're a bit of a break from the operational side of one's business, whatever that business might happen to be. So it allows them to go beyond the, okay, what are my tasks du jour, and actually dream a little and to think a little bit about the future. So what we found is during the pandemic with a lot of clients is it's actually the most energizing moment in the week. We're going to talk about
That's
strat.
amazing, because I think some people, it may feel like, you know, it's a very high barrier. Like I can't possibly get to my strat plan because I have all this other stuff
Yeah.
that's in my immediate sort
Yeah.
of future. And it's interesting when you talk about deep tired. I think I've spoken to, you know, at least, well, however number of people, but literally the last 2 days. I mean, comments ranging from a colleague I was speaking to who was basically like, I'm so tired and I'm finally okay to admit it. And she said, you know, she was on the phone with a consultant and they were both basically like, we're
100%.
so tired. And so it doesn't mean these people are ineffective. I mean, they're very high performing people. But there was almost a relief. I don't know if it's the winter or what people have gotten into, but she goes, you know what? I'm sick of saying I'm okay. I'm actually like not having a nervous breakdown, but I'm not totally okay. And so there, you know, that idea of energizing, and it's very interesting. Another friend of mine said, you know, there's a piece in the New York Times this morning, which I haven't had a chance to read yet, but it was basically like, this is why your brain is not working properly. So, I mean, I do think that these things are widespread, and you know, we're hearing from lots of different people. Hugh, thank you very much, and thank you everyone for your participation. I'm going to pass it back to my colleague Christy, who will end our session with some closing remarks. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Catherine. An amazing and inspiring exchange of ideas. We truly appreciate everyone's participation, and Hugh, we are most grateful for the time and the knowledge that you shared with all of us today. The not-for-profit organizations which you provide guidance to and represent work hard to improve our communities. So we felt that once again, this was a great opportunity for us to do a little bit of that ourselves. Hugh, to thank you, Seidel will be making a donation on your behalf to the Peter Monk Health Center at the University Health Network. As we understand, that is of particular personal interest to you. Because this event would not have been possible without the participation of all of you, our attendees, we will also be making a donation on your behalf to the Food Banks Canada COVID-19 Fund, because food assistance is still needed by so many. Take care and enjoy the rest of your day.